You know that a lot of homeowners are getting concerned about who's eating my citrus. And it's not just eating the fruit, it's just eating the rinds, which is very unusual. And some of the culprits being traced back to include roof rats. Well, guess what? Roof rats are now in orchards. They're in pistachio and other nut orchards. They're burrowing and nesting in the ground, chewing on irrigation lines, causing extensive damage, and a lot more. We're talking with Rachel Long, UC Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor based in Woodland. And Rachel, why aren't these roof rats in roofs? What are they doing in the field? How did they get there?
Good. That's a good question. And so roof rats they just live everywhere. They're very opportunistic, and when they find a food resource, they'll just go for it. So this year in particular has been really a big year. It's the year of the rat, certainly, and all of these rodents do have cyclical populations, and so some years we just do get outbreaks of voles, or we get outbreaks of roof rats and other rodents. And I think what happened is last year was such a wet winter, and we had tons of weeds that were growing everywhere, producing a lot of seeds, and just provided ideal food resources for that roof rat. And as a result, their populations just rapidly built up. I mean, these roof rats, each female can have 3 to 5 litters per year and 5 to 8 young. And so that could be like 40 offspring per rat. And so you can just see that how quickly a couple of rats can build up to hundreds in a short time.
Well, you've been the pest detective on this one. So talk a little bit how you came to the conclusion it was roof rats, because I would imagine that the first suspect would be rodents or squirrels.
Right, I know. That's what I thought too. So when I got a call to look at a pistachio orchard, I just thought for sure it's going to be ground squirrels, because that's usually what it is. And went out there and just didn't see any ground squirrels. Okay, so ground squirrels are diurnal, so they're active during the day, and just didn't see any. And when I looked at these holes in the ground, they were also way too small for a ground squirrel. So ground squirrel holes will be about 4 inches or more in diameter. And then you usually see a squirrel somewhere around it. But there was no squirrel, and these holes were about 2 to 3 inches in diameter with a little bit of, piles of nuts around it. And so I knew that it could not have been a deer mice or voles, because it was too big for that. The deer mice and voles tend to be 1 to 2 inches in diameter, and these were 3, and ground squirrels are 4. So I just was really scratching my head going, what on earth is this? Because it just was very confusing, because it was just somewhere in between. And so I thought about rats, but I just didn't know what a roof rat would be doing underground, burrowing underground. And so but did talk to a colleague, and she assured me that roof rats in the country can burrow underground and nest underground. So they're above ground and nest ground, and of course nocturnal at night. So that's why I didn't see any.
For people who grew up on Bugs Bunny cartoons, they may have thought rabbits might have been the culprit in this situation, but actually rabbits don't dig burrows, do they?
No, they don't. So that was the question, is we actually put out a game camera as well, because we thought, well, maybe we could pick something up. But all we picked up were rabbits and birds. I mean, these roof rats are just sneaky. They're really smart, and they hide. And basically, if you don't see anything but you see the damage, then suspect rats. But rabbits, like jackrabbits and cottontails, they don't dig and burrow underground. I mean, they may just sort of like create a little nest like in thatch and such, but they're not digging and burrowing underground.
And then you have the case of citrus trees, and I understand in some situations the roof rats are nesting in the citrus trees, which must be quite a surprise to anybody out there picking fruit.
Wouldn't that be awful to reach in and have a rat jump out at you? So roof rats, they're opportunistic, and if you have cover year round, like an orange tree, then that can form just this perfect protection for the roof rats during the wintertime. Unlike something like a pistachio orchard or almonds, where the leaves drop in the wintertime, and so they don't have any cover, and that's probably why then they'll go underground and burrow and nest underground. But in citrus trees, they will nest in the tree itself, and what we also see is that not only do they, feed on the fruit, and typically you'll just find like sometimes the whole and then the entire inside of the fruit is eaten out, and you're just left with a shell. And same with pomegranates. There's been damage by rats in pomegranates. But the worrisome thing about rats in like orange trees is what they're doing is they're actually stripping the bark off of limbs of trees. And so there's, a sweetness to that. Basically, the bark has the sugar conducting part of the tree, and so the rats are feeding on that. But when they strip it, they're girdling the tree, and so you can still have water conducting up and down. But when you take off the bark, it just basically girdles the tree. And so a lot of the trees that rats are nesting and feeding in then have branches that are dying back, and that's a problem because then you lose production for years.
Have you seen any evidence in a mixed planting situation of the roof rats basically following the crops? When they're done with citrus, they'll move to the next crop that's ripening, be it a nut crop or another fruit crop?
Certainly they can move around in fields, and we've seen that. I see that more in something like an alfalfa field, where if you disc the field, then the rodents will just, of course, they're going to move out. So you're going to have gophers and voles that are just like dispersing everywhere. And I think that you have two things that you probably have. Certainly some natural mortality when the food resource declines, then the rat population will go down. But I definitely think that they're moving too. I have a colleague that told me he caught something like in Woodland that he caught something like, I don't know, like 50 rats so far in the last 6 months in his backyard. And I'm like, Lordy, that's a lot. And so I think they do disperse, and once the food is gone, then they'll move somewhere else.
The University of California Ag and Natural Resources Department put out a publication about 4 years ago called Managing Roof Rats and Deer Mice in Nut and Fruit Orchards. What is the difference between a roof rat and a deer mouse?
So the roof rat is big, and much bigger than a mouse, and but they both can do damage in orchards. So again, the roof rat, the hole will be about 3 inches, whereas the deer mouse, much smaller, like a house mouse, and the holes will be 1 to 2 inches in the ground. But they both actually can cause damage. The roof rats really do move up and down trees and are feeding, on the tree and on the fruit. And then in the ground, they're just burrowing underground, not necessarily causing any damage underground. But the deer mice, they're everywhere too, and they can actually scramble up and down trees and also feed on like nuts, on almonds, both in the trees and also on the ground. So that kind of surprised me that that actually deer mice can go up and down trees. And I'm always surprised by the number of wildlife that does move around and go up and down on trees as well. Like sometimes I see lizards in trees, and I'm like, what are you doing up there? So yeah, so wildlife actually, the mice and rodents and rats can move around and certainly cause damage to tree crops.
And it's rather expensive. I know there was a study done, I think back in the year 2000, about the cost per acre that deer mice can do, and they pegged it at over $20 per acre to almond orchards in Fresno County due to deer mice damage.
Right. So they can certainly be damaging. The critical issue here is that what I really wanted to let people know about is how to identify these different rodents out in our crops, so that we can get a jump on them early and control them early before outbreaks occur. So that was my intent on putting out a news alert on the rats, was just to say, hey, this is what the damage looks like. Recognize it early. If you can, just use snap traps to catch those rodents and keep them out, keep those populations low. Because once you get a massive infestation in there, then you can really get a lot of damage. And then control becomes incredibly challenging. So this is just really a heads up that rodents are out there, and just keep an eye on them and know how to look for the signs of their activity, and then control them early on to prevent damage. And I always suggest also, like barn owl boxes are good to put up for helping to control gophers, and barn owls will also feed on rats, so they can take a lot of rodents and help us out naturally. So that's one suggestion, is to put up a barn owl box and use your snap traps and just monitor and know what's out there.
Well, let's talk about some less toxic methods for controlling roof rats and deer mice. How effective is flooding, if at all?
Oh, well, for certainly for gophers and for ground squirrels, it definitely helps to suppress the rodents. But now we've really shifted a lot towards the drip irrigation and the subsurface drip, and so there you do have rodent problems, because you can't flood them out, and that's why you have to certainly get in there early and manage them, and certainly trapping works well.
And that brings up another added cost if you're fighting a rodent problem like that, is that drip irrigation tubing becomes a target of thirsty rodents.
Right. Yeah, they do. And in particular, like sometimes after harvest, like a sunflower seed crop for that hybrid seed that you're producing, that after harvest and everything is so dry, you do get some cracks in the soil, and then you have seed out there, and you have voles and deer mice and house mice that are incredibly opportunistic, and they just race out and they're feeding on that seed, and they drop into the holes, into the cracks, and feed on that drip line. So and then they cause little leaks that then have to be repaired. So and that's costly, actually trying to fix all those leaks. So it is a challenge, and one of my colleagues is sort of looking at ways to put a little bit of water in the line, maybe after harvest, just to seal up those cracks and keep the rodents from dropping down and feeding on and nibbling on those lines, because fixing these rodent leaks and those drip lines is expensive and time consuming.
So you mentioned flooding as a possible control for certain rodent pests, and you mentioned snap traps for roof rats and deer mice. Are there any other less toxic alternatives?
Well, so you do have traps for gophers as well, and there's a lot of work being done on gopher control in particular, and ground squirrel control, and they have these different units that you like carbon dioxide or something, just that goes down the hole and takes care of these rodents. So there are options for many of our rodent pests, and some of these are registered for organic control as well. I wish there were more options. Some people talk about like cats and releasing cats. My concern about cats certainly is that they eat everything. So while they may eat some rodents, they're going to eat birds and lizards and any like snakes or anything out there as well. So that concerns me that if people are promoting cats, they're not specific on on rodents. So I wouldn't go that route. But certainly the traps. And some people use barriers. They'll like put a fence down and bury it so that and put it like a foot above ground, so so gophers and such can't go in, get in. Certainly for some habitat plantings or plants, they'll put like something around the root so that so it protects it more from from rodents. You've got tree tubes. So there's multiple ways of trying to control the rodents.
So when it comes to roof rats, though, there are limited options if you want to try to avoid rodenticides.
Right. But except for, because, the big thing is with roof rats and rats in general, is they are smart. They're very clever. They're shy of anything new, and they're very wary. So the roof rats are challenging. And so essentially, the best thing certainly for homeowners, I would say, is your snap traps, and try that for maybe a few local infestations on a farm. But if you've got an outbreak, and you're getting damaged, then you need to go to the bait stations up in the trees for managing the rodents. But that said, you've really got to be careful and know when you can use it, and because you can't use it in season for controlling the rodents. So that's something to really watch for. And before it gets to that level, that it is really important to think about our wildlife and the natural control that you can get out there by birds and raptors like the hawks and also the barn owls, and to try to do the local trapping to keep those rats under control. But some years it's just one of the worst outbreaks of rats that we've had in a long time, in many years, and so it's in years like this where you do see a lot of damage, then you do need to be proactive and protect your trees.
And if you want more information about barn owls, for example, and barn owl houses, University of California has some great resources at the UC ANR page, and check that out. Also, managing roof rats and deer mice in nut and fruit orchards, that's available as well from UC ANR. So check those out online as well. Well, it's the year of the rat.
It certainly is this year, and there's always the year of something. And last year it was the year of the vole. I had so many voles out here in the country. It was unbelievable. And now we've moved on, and it's the year of the rat.
Well, hopefully next year won't be grasshoppers.
I hope not. Yeah, I haven't seen those, and just knock on wood that it's going to be a quiet year.
All right. Rachel Long, UC Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor based in Woodland. Thanks for a few minutes of your time.
Well, you're most welcome.